Hello, my name is Louise Jose and I'm the marketing coordinator here at CyberClan. Welcome to this episode of Incidentally Informed. During this webinar, we'll be discussing the topic of how to achieve cyber resilience in today's threat landscape. I'm joined by a fantastic panel who I'll introduce shortly, but first I'd like to give you a brief introduction on who we are and what we do. Over the years, CyberClan has helped thousands of clients through cyber incident. We also offer risk management services and managed security services. We're based across the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, and we're looking at expanding into the EMEA region. This enables us to offer global services to the victims of attack, but also industry partners alike. So today, I am joined by Stephan Gonzalez, Steve Hindle, and Dwayne Robinson, who I'm going to ask to introduce themselves right now. Stephan, why don't we start with you?
Ian, I'm the Information Security Officer, been with the organization for over 10 years. And prior to that, been in this field for over 20, I would say. I lost count. They just start meshing together the years. Looking forward and thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And Steve?
Yeah, thanks. Cheers, mate. No, this is part of the program. This one here. All right, there we go. I've had to bail out of that room, so you just got me from my terrible laptop mic and speaker here, so I hope you can hear me. My name is Steve Hindle. I'm the head of global security for SYKES Enterprises, BPO, yeah, happy to be here. Thanks, Louise.
Thank you again for joining us as well. And Dwayne.
Welcome, everyone. Yeah, I'm Dwayne Robinson. I oversee our incident response team. So typically what that means is when a company does not have good resilience, they call us. So hopefully we'll get into talk about so that doesn't happen. But well,
it's your job to fix it if something goes wrong. Wonderful. So yes, as Dwayne said, he's the guy you go to if your resiliency isn't already as strong as it should be. So we are constantly bombarded with news of businesses being hit by cyber attack, and it's becoming more and more apparent that it's not an if, it's a when you're going to get hit. And again, it's becoming more and more apparent that it's not just your company is. Even the smallest of small businesses can be hit very easily. More and more companies seem to be choosing to invest in more advanced technologies to aid in mitigating an attack. But is this really the right way to go? I'm going to start with Steve Hindle. What would your answer to that question be?
No, it's a great question. So all you're doing is risking adding complexity. So when you're adding technologies, when you're looking at advanced solutions, EDR, everything else, to defend against the latest cyber threats, you really have to look at key investments into critical technologies that simplify your response, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So I think you can't overcomplicate your tech stack without augmenting the human piece. And if you lose sight of the human piece by just investing in your technology stack without then reinforcing your people and your processes, that's where a lot of organizations struggle. I wouldn't say go wrong, but definitely struggle.
Wonderful. Stephan, do you have anything to add to that?
I would agree that that disconnect between the technology and the personnel is really something that that I've seen has been misunderstood. I think is the thing that I want to say is we think as we throw more technology that the good salesman is going to give me this product that's autonomous and it's going to maintain itself and it's going to function properly, and then you forget to realize that there has to be that human person to not only make sure that the system is doing what it says it's supposed to be doing, but also making sure that it's up to date. That management piece gets forgotten because, you can't just hit that toggle to say update and we're good, the rise of Skynet. So that's the one piece I do agree with Steve, and that's something that we just can't forget, and we seem to forget that. We want to throw all these millions at technology, but then when we say, hey, let's hire new talent, we're like, well, we're good with the staff we have. We'll just get more technology to fill the gap, and I think that's not the best course of action all the time.
Yeah, I totally get where you're coming from there. Dwayne, really, when it comes to all of these people investing in these more and more advanced technologies, it's more as well about having them configured properly in the first place, isn't it? Because you can have as much technology as you think you need, but unless that's actually installed and configured properly for your systems, there's really no point having it, is there?
Yeah, I mean, we've had lots of cases where the client has had top tier technology. They've even had alerts thrown by that technology, and either or the technology wasn't configured properly and it didn't catch it, or it threw the alert properly and it went off at 2 o'clock in the morning when their whole team is sleeping, and went by hours later unnoticed, and unfortunately the client still got hit with ransomware or whatever. But no, the reality is while there are some very sophisticated attacks where you do need some more advanced technology, the lion's share of the stuff we see is there's some pretty basic things that companies can do to just get to that point first.
Yeah, and to add to what Dwayne said there as well, the key piece around that about being 2 a.m. As incident responders, just like first responders in the really real world, incident responders in cybersecurity often find that these attackers they're not interested in your scope, and they're not interested in a business 9 to 5. They will hit you at 2 a.m. on a Sunday evening because that's when they know that most of IT and most of the security organization is asleep, and then they can go for at least 8 hours undetected. By everything apart from your technology. And if you don't have the right people, including MSSPs and the right vendors, the right threat hunters, actively watching for that, then at that point, from the point of incursion to the point of trigger, you're looking at a matter of hours. You're not looking at days from the point where somebody triggers a payload in your environment. So rapid response is critical, and training that response and building the processes and the people around it is important.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. It really leads me into my next question, which is, what basic steps can companies implement to prepare in case of an attack? Steve, do you want to start?
For me, I lead our crisis management and incident response teams from a physical perspective as well as a cyber perspective, and resiliency really comes in that training piece. You have to train, and you have to train repeatedly. I think it was there's Bruce Lee once was quoted as saying that there's don't be afraid of the man who knows 1,000 kicks. Be afraid of the man who's trained one kick 1,000 times, because that's the person who's most effective. And I think that's one of the key pieces around this is about training your teams and training your pieces, but understanding what your target looks like to an attacker. So you've got to understand your landscape, and you have to train and run tabletops and reinforce the message, because at the end of the day, it all comes down to your people.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd like to say is one of the things about the training that I've seen in the past is sometimes we get into this false sense of security. Oh, IT is going to take care of that, or our cyber insurance is going to take care of that, and really the exercise goes to the wayside. When I was in the military, they were like, train as you fight, right? And you have to do it as realistic as possible. And that's one of those things where those tabletop exercises, I really want to stress, are so important. You want to make them realistic. In the last one that we performed, I basically told everybody, I don't want to hear solutions, or we would prefer not receiving solutions that you think someone else is going to implement. You know, the rules of the land are the ones that we've provided. And before you assume something's already in play, you got to ask. And the reason is because in the past, they would say, oh, IT has backups. IT is going to restore us in, 2 hours. In 2 hours, they're going to rebuild the entire network. And I'm like, not quite, right? So it's really having that realistic, have that mental exercise to come up with things that you may have not seen, or identify gaps that you've left in your plan, so that it can become that much better.
And remember that a plan never survives first contact with the enemy. And that's always important. You have the best plans in the world, but they never survive first contact with the enemy. And it doesn't matter how many times you rehearse them, there's always going to be something comes out of left field. And that's where the flexibility element of resiliency comes in. You have to be flexible and adaptable at that point of change. You have to be able to pivot rapidly during an incident, not afterwards.
Thank you. Dwayne, did you have something to add?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything my peers have just said. I guess the one thing that I would probably add so ideally we have our incident response plan. Most people don't, but get on it. Often, disaster recovery plans and stuff are probably fairly mature now. Some companies even have a more robust, business continuity plan, which is good. So if you can get kind of all those and sort of in place, perfect. It does surprise me how many organizations we see don't really know they don't have a good grasp of all their systems. So absolutely should, and more importantly, when you do, what's the priority? Because sometimes when you're in a crunch of either trying to protect or trying to restore, what do you need up and running first and foremost to try to maintain some sort of business operation, right? And it's unfortunately surprising how many organizations don't know that.
Yeah, I mean, you guys all covered IR plans as like one of the most basic things you can do to improve your resiliency. So obviously, they are one of the most important things that you can have in place already. But what should we be looking at including within that?
Critical assets, as mentioned, not only knowing your systems, but also knowing what is critical to the organization. If everything is critical, nothing's critical. We've had those conversations where everybody's like, well, I can't be without this or X, Y, Z, and then everybody wants it all at the same time. Like I had mentioned before, you can't bring up an entire network within hours. You have to pick what is the most important. I think you made a great point there, Dwayne, on what can we do so we can get the ball rolling, and then start branching out to those other functions that are important as well. Not saying that anything's less important, not important, but it is important to go for critical assets. And so that way you can protect those assets by having accountability of those assets.
100%.
Yeah, I think, as well, in a previous webinar, we discussed as well the need to have, recognition of who you would be contacting from your insurance, but also from a legal side of things, and also a comms plan as well, because as soon as you're hit by an attack, that's the first thing that runs through probably my mind as the marketing person would be, right, we need to tell all our customers that if their information's been exfiltrated, or there's been some sort of data breach, we're going to need to notify people. And that's where the trigger finger from the marketing department happens, and you get early notifications instead of taking the time to actually consider it from a legal standpoint as well. So is it worth getting those departments, like your legal department and your marketing department, involved in those tabletop exercises, as well as the in-house IT team?
Yeah, 100%. As Steve mentioned, this should not rely on IT's shoulders. Like the business side of the fence, whether it be HR, legal, operation, like everybody's got a stake in the game, 100%, right? And ideally, you're testing those plans on a regular basis, and everybody is involved. And I get it; it's going to kill a whole weekend, probably a couple times a year, but it's better than killing a whole month or 2 or 3 when you get hit.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. So now this is, quite an interesting subject point for me. As again, the marketing person, my whole, learning around cybersecurity is mainly pivoted around stats. And this is one that always crops up. 90% of attacks are caused by human error. So with that in mind, how important is it to train everyone within your organization to spot the signs of a cyber attack, such as phishing and business email compromise?
I don't want to let my colleagues talk. I'll hijack the whole conversation otherwise.
I think training is crucial. You have to set up that culture. You have to set up those processes. If let's say someone is savvy enough and you haven't trained them and they've identified some type of phishing attack, if they don't know what to do with it, then you failed. Because then they're not going to do anything with it. I mean, what are they going to do? Tell their coworker, and their coworker is going to say, "Oh, well, just delete it," right? But if you create that process, that education, so say, hey, this is a bad thing, and this is what you do with it, then the organization can take that action to address that situation. I think a couple of years ago, there was a bunch of Google Docs scam going on, sending these emails. And it was really interesting. In my organization, we got a ton of those, but all of them got reported through the proper channels. We ended up blocking all of those sources or destinations. And then shortly, I would say within 30 minutes of that is when the first news article dropped on the TV and on the feed saying, hey, there's this rampant Google Docs scam going around nationwide. So that was very reassuring to see that the culture in the organization, they had accepted the training and implemented the training. So I was really happy to see that from the staff, and leadership was very happy to see that. So training is crucial, and giving them the course of action. Not only say that's bad, but this is what you do with it.
Yeah, and I'd reinforce Steph's comment there as well, that the biggest piece that I took away from what you just said, Stephan, in the way in which your organization was able to handle that and get ahead of it, right? Because it's about getting ahead of it, because it's something that we can rarely do. We are often on the tail end. We're often in reactive mode, in response mode, not necessarily in proactive and proactive protection, as well as empowering your end users. But you clearly took a position there, which I think everybody has to accommodate, which is you've got to empower your end users to be able to communicate freely, openly, and transparency without fear of repercussions. The old days of security naming and shaming people to get them to act through fear is gone. You have to empower your users. You have to be able to make sure that they can report threats without any fear of ramifications. You've got to make sure that a user can pick up the phone, call your security organization or whoever it may be in your company and say, hey, I got this. I clicked, without being afraid of telling anyone they clicked. Or, hey, I got this in my mailbox and I just deleted it. Was that the right thing to do? Or even just to pick up the phone and say, I'm just checking, is this genuine or not? What am I allowed to do with this? And if you can drive that culture, that collaboration, that partnership, and that open communication without any fear of ramifications or the naming and shaming, then you'll get a user base across your entire company, including Fred in accounting. And I'm going to see Louise smile now. There you go. Right on cue. You're going to see those people who are empowered to reach out, empowered to contact security as a partner, not as somebody to be worried about or a department to be worried about.
I think that's the thing. It's cultivating that culture of there are no stupid questions, isn't it? Really, and it's better to be safe than sorry. And making sure that the people who have the answers to those questions aren't visibly exasperated by having been asked them as well. That's the thing. I think, you know, coming again from my side of things, I was always encouraged to ask the questions if I wanted to learn something new. I started my career in tech, but it was interesting tech. We were selling things that didn't technically exist, which was brilliant. And I wouldn't be here today talking to you guys if I hadn't have sat down with some of our wonderful team members like Dwayne, and asked those questions and learnt more. So, you know, I totally agree with that. It's definitely making sure people feel safe and secure asking those questions. And, you know, Dwayne, we saw a huge rise in the number of cases coming through at the beginning of the pandemic, didn't we? Due to mostly people working primarily unsecurely from home and not being able to feel that they could contact people in that way.
Yeah, 100%. Like this, we talked about this in past, you know, webinars and whatnot. The world was just not ready for 90% of it to be working from home, right? The technology wasn't there. People's security stack was designed for people in offices routing through the data centers and stuff, right? So it played some good catch up for sure, you know, over the past year and a half or whatever. But the one thing I would add to what my friends just mentioned is we've seen it a few times where they fall victim to a phishing type attack, and they go to wire money off to, you know, what they think is some other company they're supposed to be doing business with. If your organization has some good procedures around that, maybe it's like there's a separation of duties around it, then you should be able to stop it. And we've actually seen some stories of where a company has gone to make an insurance claim. The client that got hit did not follow their procedures, which would have mitigated somebody actually doing that wire transfer, and them not paying out that sort of claim, if you will, because the company did not follow their own procedures. So there's steps people can take as well in addition to the training, just to make try to mitigate their risk.
Yeah, I think we've got to be cognizant of the fact that, because Dwayne just touched on it, and we talked about the pandemic. The pandemic has changed the landscape in its entirety. Security used to be all about securing the perimeter being the edge of your network, your email gateway, because that's obviously where the majority of attacks come in through phishing, because the attackers understand that the human beings are the weakest point, right? The human firewall, that's what we've got to look at, because your perimeter has now followed your users. So your perimeter is no longer your network, which is your office, which is where your users used to be sat. Your perimeter is now everybody's homes, and they are sharing that network with their kids, their spouses, their significant others, their flatmates. Bob down the street, right? They're maybe working from Starbucks, maybe working from an unsecured perimeter, which is a hostile network. And so where is your perimeter? Your perimeter is wherever your users are. And so if you're looking at that piece, and you're looking at building resiliency in, and you're looking at the protective controls as well as the response, you've got to consider where your perimeter is. Your perimeter is everywhere now. Nobody could have foreseen what the pandemic would do to cybersecurity as a whole.
Yeah, wonderful. No, it's so true. And a lot of people at the beginning of the pandemic did literally just take anything and go home, didn't they? Even if they didn't have a laptop, they had a desktop computer. Then we saw people taking desktops, taking their office chair and going home. And so, when they would have normally been connected up to all of the systems, probably via LAN or WAN, they're not anymore. And it's making sure that they're completely secure, isn't it, as well? So it was all such a shock, and it was all done so quickly, wasn't it? I think it was quite difficult at the very beginning of the pandemic to get everything sorted out as quickly as possible, and as securely as possible.
Yeah, we're now in that windfall stage, right? The bungee cord is coming back. So it's all about what controls can you put in place now that you have sent people home. If you did send them home in a hurry, which a lot of organizations did at the start of the pandemic, if they're still home now and you haven't addressed that, you haven't had that recoil, you haven't addressed those pieces of the security controls that you have from that extended perimeter. That's what you would be needing to focus on. It's not just about your firewalls. Again, concentrate on your users, wherever your users are.
Cool. So we've talked about, users, we've talked about IT teams. Would it be worth employing an MSSP, even if you have a fairly robust IT team in place? Would they be able to offer a more objective opinion on your current systems, things like that?
I'll jump on that one too. And this is not, granted, we in CyberClan all have an MSSP offering, but that doesn't fall up to me. But I can tell you some good examples of where they really like. And we will, so for example, I'll give you a real world scenario. An active attack comes into one of our clients. We can proactively reach out to all of our other clients to ensure that they are not victim of that same breach attempt. So, I mean, right there, even if you have, lots of, a good 24/7 sort of covered shop and the phone's going to go off in the middle of the night and somebody's, guaranteed to pick it all up, there's a whole other world that they're not going to have visibility to that an MSSP can offer to them. That's just one of the add-ons, I suppose, I would throw out there. And it doesn't need to be CyberClan, but we want it to be CyberClan, of course. I don't put that plug in.
I think one of the benefits of the MSSP is that skill set gap that the organization may have. A lot of teams, technical teams, we get in our head, this is how we do it. This is the right way to do it because I've been doing it like this for so long, or this is how the organization likes me to do it. And we get that tunnel vision, and when you onboard an MSSP, I would hope that you would ask them to have that open communication, so that way they can point out those gaps, that you just don't realize, the unknown unknowns, right? You didn't know it was an issue, and so you didn't know to address it. And then they'll come in with, a different perspective and tell you, hey, you've got gaps in all of this, or you forgot this entire sector or this entire business or, avenue, and you go from there. Like you had been talking about earlier about, accessing your legal firms and stuff like that, when you're creating your plans. But, and someone said cyber insurance. I'm like, well, like you had said, Dwayne, it's very important to know what are the clauses that are going to void that cyber insurance. You can't just say, well, I'm just going to rely on my cyber insurance. But what if your cyber insurance doesn't want to pay ransoms? That's their stance. They don't like paying ransoms, and then you're stuck in a difficult position. Or maybe they do want to pay ransoms and you don't. So it's this, you got to make sure that you look at those fine print, know who you're onboarding, and get those different perspectives to help you improve your security.
Yeah, I think
it's a full circle.
Right.
Full circle.
All about partnership at the end of the day, and I agree with Stephan and Dwayne here. The key pieces around your MSSPs is as a trusted partner, right? Stop thinking of them as a vendor, start thinking of them as a trusted partner. And if you can't think of your cybersecurity vendors, the platforms that you use, the technologies that you use, the MSSPs that you're engaging with or thinking of engaging with, then you really need to be thinking about what can they bring to the table? What is the partnership, right? How many of you use Waze when you're navigating, when you're driving, or if you're in a strange place, right? Getting from point A to point B. You may have a car that has a sat nav system built into it, but you may use Waze anyway. Why do you do that? It's because Waze is crowdsourcing the journey, right? Because when you get in your car and you're using Waze as a navigation system, there are other users on the road who are telling you that there's an object on the road, telling you that the traffic's about to slow down. right? It is groundbreaking in that way because it's crowdsourcing the intelligence from other people. And that's what your vendor partners and your MSSPs can bring to augment your security organization. I'm very fortunate. I have a security organization that stretches all around the world, regionally and by business unit and by cybersecurity technology. But regardless, we still engage with cybersecurity vendors and MSSPs as trusted partners because we need that threat intel. We need that crowdsourced threat intel, which they're seeing in other customers, whether it be your email gateway. Bonnie asked a question about, digitizing and modernizing your cybersecurity footprint as a small to medium enterprise. You've got to consider keeping it simple, and you've got to consider that you want to engage with a cybersecurity vendor or platform who is a partner, who will bring something that they've seen in the field to you to prevent you from getting hit. Because we're all in the same fight. We are all in the trenches and we're all in the front lines. Engage with an MSSP that's in that fight with you and not just trying to sell you product. That's my 2 cents there.
Well, from that perspective, we sent out an email last week to all of our contacts. So whether that was clients, legal or insurers, informing them of the Kaseya attacks and how we could help. And again, the same today with the new vulnerabilities that have come out. We've sent out yet another email informing all of our clients and partners again about all of that too. So yes, we try and keep as an MSSP ourselves, we do try and keep you as up to date as possible, and we also have our weekly newsletter as well with all the latest news and events and things going on in the industry, just to make sure everyone's as up to date with the goings on in cybersecurity as well. So yeah, I can attest to the fact that we try and make sure our clients and customers, partners, etc.
You're not saying that because you're marketing, right?
No, of course not. Thank you. So we've covered a lot of bases already. And yes, as you mentioned, with Bonnie's question, we will be taking more questions at the end. So if anyone does have anything that they feel that they would like some more information on, please do put it into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we will get right on that as soon as we've finished with our final element of the webinar. I want to ask each one of you, what is your number one piece of advice for anyone looking to improve the cyber resilience of their corporation? What is your number one takeaway piece of advice for those people who are attending this webinar today?
I can go first if you want. It's not going to be very flashy, to be honest, but I tell you, statistically, the majority of the clients we see were breached from poor patching, just poor security posture, like things that, poor passwords, things that do not cost a lot of money. Like we talked early on about some higher end technology and stuff, and there's some cool stuff out there. Absolutely, that will help you, but get the basics right first. Know your stuff, document it all, ensure your backups are resilient. So so actually kind of shy, but sometimes the old stuff is the better stuff. Like old school tapes might save you in some of these cases. Make sure you're patching on a regular basis. Stay current with open vulnerabilities, and get some secure passwords and multi-factor authentication, and you will be, you'll cover yourself from probably in the 90th percentile of breaches. It's nothing flashy though.
I'd like to add training. Training is crucial. Your staff, I call the staff in my organization, I always tell them they're sentinels. They're out there, they're watching, they're telling me what the pulse of what's going on in those emails, what they're seeing on the systems. If their computer's acting wonky, pick up the phone and call us. I can't tell that your computer's acting weird. I can only tell after the fact. So if they're educated to be able to inform the the technical team or the leadership that something's going on, then that's definitely going to get us in the right direction. As you mentioned, backups. Typically we look at our backups and for the recovery aspect. I try to focus a little bit as well into the prevention or the awareness aspect. Let me know that there's something going on my network before that individual, the classic anonymous with the hoodie and the mask, hits the detonation button, and there goes the whole parliament. My data center, goes up in smoke, and they walk out with the cool music in the background. So it's I agree. You have to check those backups to make sure they're good, because what's a backup if you can't restore it? But I think the training and visibility, the actual visibility on your network and your staff play a huge part in that.
Yeah, and I'd add to that and augment what Steph just said as well, because we talk about backups in the terms of resilience as a recovery element, but your backups are also target. The bad guys do not care about scope. You may be auditing yourself, you may be PCI compliant, ISO 27001, SSA, you name it, but you defined that scope to support the business. You've probably not defined that scope as your threat surface of what's going to be attacked, because your login infrastructure, what you use, whether it's Microsoft Active Directory or whatever it may be, to authenticate your people, that's a target. Your backups are a target. The attackers, if they are in your environment or trying to get into their environment, they're going to go after two things, because what they're trying to cause is they're trying to cause disruption. So they're going to go after your login, your authentication infrastructure, and they're going to go after your backups, because that way they know if your people can't get into work, they're impacting your business. You're more likely to pay a ransom. If you can't restore from your backups, then you're more likely to pay a ransom to recover your data. So secure your login infrastructure, secure your backups, because you are going to need them, as part of recovery. And if you can't get to them, you can't get to them. So your attackers, my biggest message to everybody is your attackers don't care. Your attackers don't care about scope at all, and they're going to go after the things that matter to you most. One of my former colleagues and one of my best friends is Batman, and I mean that in all sincerity. And so I go back constantly to the Dark Knight. I'm a big old nerd. So when you go back to the Dark Knight Rises, and Alfred says to Batman, he says that some people just want to watch the world burn, Mr. Wayne. And that's what the bad guys are trying to do. They're no longer really trying to extort you or steal your data. They're now trying to disrupt your business. The Joker tried to disrupt your business. So that's what they're trying to do. So secure your backups, secure your login infrastructure, and be ready when things go wrong.
Wonderful. I think as well, one thing that keeps coming up from webinar to webinar is make sure your insurance documents are not saved on your network for one very simple reason. And that is
continuity plans. Don't have your business continuity plans online on your network where people can't get to them.
Yeah. So by having your insurance documents on your network, the attackers can find them, they can look at them, and they can find out how much you're insured for in case of an attack, and how much your insurers, as Stephan pointed out, if they are willing to pay a ransom, how much you are insured up to, and how much they are willing to pay, because they will just go in and straight away ask for exactly that amount of money. So yeah, there's lots of basics to keep in mind there. And thank you so much for joining us today and for giving us your expertise. And we've just had a message through from Bonnie as well saying thank you, that the advice that she's received today was really helpful. So thank you so much for answering her questions and and helping her out with that. So yes, we've just had another question through from Stuart Smiles. Where should documents be stored if not on your own network? Who would like to answer that one?
Double-edged sword. Come on, Dwayne, you look brave.
Yeah, no, well, I'm not here to plug vendors and stuff, but I can tell you there's a variety of SaaS-based applications used in my past life, and that's where our business continuity plan would sit. I would recommend that's where you should put your cyber insurance documents, some other key documents and stuff, and you pay for the storage and you pay a monthly fee for that. Often that would have maybe call out lists in the event of something, whether it's a cyber attack or a building burns down or whatever as well, right? So there's a variety of SaaS applications that serve that purpose.
Wonderful.
From a double-edged sword perspective, that is, if you're storing things in the cloud, just remember the cloud is somebody else's computer. That's all it really means. So be sure, again, going back to what we talked about earlier, be sure you trust your third-party providers. If you're going to store it offline, off your network, in the cloud, whether it's OneDrive, Google, or wherever you may be storing it, believing that it's safe from attack, it's not necessarily safe from attack, and it's just on somebody else's computer. We've seen time and time again third parties, supply chain attacks, Kaseya, SolarWinds, even Microsoft Exchange was hit and hit on a third party level. So nobody's safe, including the people that you put your crown jewels with. So that would be my devil's advocate, double-edged sword piece. Make sure you can trust your partners.
Yeah, no, but and the authentication behind it and stuff as well, right? Because if you do get hit and all your authentication mechanisms are compromised, and that SaaS application I just told you about, leverages that, then it's not going to serve you much purpose. So, no, I would agree with that. Sorry, Stephen, I think you went.
And I'd like to add, just don't forget to update your documents.
Yeah.
Sometimes we throw these documents up there. We're like, oh yeah, it's up in the cloud, and next thing you know, you're logging in and you're like, wow, this hasn't been updated in 3, 4, 5 years, and you're like, it's non-applicable to the current situation and the environment. So don't forget to update those documents on a regular basis.
Your business continuity plans, do they include a cyber attack, or are they just focused on fire, flood, and everything else, right? So does your business continuity plan keep up to date with changing threats? And really importantly, if you're looking at all of your documentation, at Steph's point, keeping it up to date, right? I don't know of an organization on this planet whose pandemic business continuity response plan took into account COVID-19. COVID-19 hit, you dust the pandemic plan off the shelf and think to yourself, well, that doesn't work anymore. Let's start from scratch. But if you started from scratch, have you then updated your documentation to take into account everything you've just done? All the jobs that you said could never be done remotely, but are now being done remotely. It's funny how that works, right?
It's funny, isn't it? Like the company that my sister works for, they've just been discussing how they're going to get people back to the office. Her department is going to be completely flexible, can work from home full time if they want to, but they've decided that customer service has to go back to the office because of dodgy signal and bandwidth at home. So instead of trying to help them sort that out on an individual basis, they've just decided, no, we should just bring you all back to the office. So there you go. We're getting questions flooding in left, right and centre at the moment. So Stuart's also asked, what is the can you tell me the value of an EDR or privileged access management for small organisations?
Does a small organization really need spend a lot of money on very complex technology? I guess if I was to condense Stuart's several questions down, EDR, access management, EDR, endpoint detection and response, is your next level up, if you will, from your antivirus software that tries to do a little bit more than what antivirus historically did. For those of you not familiar with the acronym. Same with MFA, multi-factor authentication, not just your username and your password, but also something else like a token on your phone or something similar. A lot of these have value. A lot of these have, you have your lines of defense right? They all add into those lines of defense, that layered security model, that complexity, but you've got to keep it simple, not just simple for you managing it, if you're the IT manager or security manager or new into that role, but keep it simple for your end users. If you add technology that adds complexity, not just to your life as the IT or security organization, but technology that adds to the complexity of your users, make your passwords incredibly complex so much that your users have to write them down, then what's the point, right? So Stuart mentioned MFA, multi-factor authentication, using a phone as a second factor or anything similar, or an app or whatever it may be, or a token generator. I would say that's critical. I would say that's actually more critical, perhaps, than an EDR. Get a good antivirus and get MFA, multi-factor authentication, in place, and you'll fend off a large gamut of the threats that are trying to circumvent your users. Because what an attacker is trying to do is they're trying to gain privilege. They're trying to gain access, get authenticated. Well, if you can make it harder for the bad guy to get authenticated, knowing that your user, your human firewall, is your first and best line of defense, stop talking about them in the terms of your weakest link. They're your best line of defense. So keep it simple for the end user, not just for you guys as a security or IT practitioner, I think would be my advice to Stuart and Tim as well.
So I'm going to agree but contradict Steve on one thing there. Sorry. I agree.
I'll take both, Dwayne. I'll take both. Absolutely.
I agree with 90%, right? And MFA 100% got to do it. The reality is a lot of this technology is not inexpensive. No one can afford to do it all, so we need to prioritize for sure. A good EDR tool will save some organizations, especially in this remote world. I can't tell you how many times we get a client come in. I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to plug or bash other vendors, but they just had a very generic antivirus type tool. It did not catch it, right? And the MFA trying to stop the bad guy from authenticating, 100% you need that. But if they manage to get in because the untrained employee sort of let them in, and now they're, then what do? They've sort of bypassed that multi-factor authentication for it. So a good EDR tool, which are not cheap, they are not cheap, I think we do hold a lot of value into those, to be pretty honest. Like it's saved our bacon a few times.
I will back up everything that Dwayne said, including his contradiction of what I said earlier, because I was approaching it from the context of, if you're a small to medium business, can you afford an EDR? And if you can't, invest in a technology that you can afford, because that's important. And the best technology you can afford is educating your users and ensuring that they're trying to help you.
Yeah, so
I'm a big believer in EDR. But just don't have a big believer in it. And I'm fortunate that I work for a large organization that can afford to do EDR.
There you
and
go.
I've also been in that boat where I've worked for small organizations that can't.
Well, I know everyone's seen Tim's question as well. I'm an IT manager, a new IT manager to this organisation. I've been in IT for over 15 years. My priority is security, and I just signed on to CyberClan's MSP. But security is one of my lowest skill sets. What training or education do you think would be valuable to increase one's security knowledge to protect an organisation? So, yeah, are there any training courses or programs or things that you could suggest for Tim as an IT manager?
I think Tim's doing himself a good service. He already knows what he's doing because he's still in IT. Because going into security, you're not leaving IT. So, so that's important, but it's common sense and fundamentals, right? Don't click things you don't trust, and don't trust things that you just don't know. And that's important, and that's an important message to get to your end users. So, IT is not necessarily known for being the most people-friendly organization on the planet. It's lots of guys sat in dark rooms looking at flashing lights. We've all been there, right? Don't pretend that we haven't. We've all watched those progress bars scrolling across the screen and wish we were doing something else. But if you're now working in IT and you're moving into security, and security is now one of your new responsibilities, focus on the people. That's my advice to Tim and to everybody. Focus on the people. secure the human, and then use technology as your backstop.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I would also say, you know, to help one progress in their role is continue to attend sessions like this one, lunch and learns, talk to peers, establish that peer network, so that way, you know, you're not just reading Reddit or some other forum or something like that to get information. You actually have people who have, you know, boots on ground, as they say, you know, hands at the keyboard, and they can provide you, you know, those, you know, I did X and I experienced Y, and here are my recommendations, and this is why. And, you know, you can make those decisions for yourself and your team going forward, but establish a network. It's critical. Having that network is someone to reach out.
Two of the best tools you can use for getting security content, good security content, shockingly, is Twitter and LinkedIn. Do a search. Look up the names of people who are on these webinars, right? You know, you can see the content they share. You can see the information that's out there. Twitter and LinkedIn, social media in general, you know, aside from having all the disinformation, it has an awful lot of free information, an awful lot of resources, like, you know, organizations like CyberClan sharing these amazing webinars where you get lots of intelligent people, and some guy called Steve Hindle who likes to pretend. Those are the kind of pieces you want to slot together. You want to get involved, right? To quote Steph, right? Get involved, get engaged. There's so much information out there, and it's all freely available. You don't have to pay for it.
Yeah, I mean, I was offered a very, very lovely compliment about a week and a half ago from, again, a rather nice gentleman called Steve Hindle, who actually said that I knew a fair amount about cybersecurity, considering I was a marketing person. Again, it was because I've been doing hosting these webinars. I've learned so much from the panels that we've had already, and also, you know, not being worried about asking the questions that I have, Tim. So going to people within the organisation like Dwayne or you know, asking our sales teams as well the questions that I have about the products that we sell and things like that, means that I've been growing my knowledge since I started in November 2020. So there you go. I think, you know, that's brilliant advice. Thank you, guys. And Stuart seems to have lots of questions for us today. So let's see if there's any that we haven't answered. Oh my goodness, best organisations for getting logs of access attempts, etc. How should break glass passwords be kept secure for network documents? Oh goodness, he's full of questions. So pick a question, guys. Who wants to get started?
Yeah.
I think security is. Oh, sorry, Dwayne, go ahead.
No, it's good. I'm just wondering if, in the essence of time, if we could commit to Stuart to getting back into him offline for all of his questions would be. But I'm particularly going to latch on to the question around how do you see people going remote in office balance, because that is a hot button topic all over social media. Louise, you just mentioned it with, I think it was your sister's company or something. My wife's going through that as well. Thankfully at CyberClan we're 100% remote, so we don't have that challenge in front of us, but most organizations do. Thankfully, most organizations, or a lot of organizations, have made some good headway into bolstering their technology for remote access, but probably still, I would argue, still not to the extent that it was in the data center, right? Like in the data center, in the offices, there's a nice, robust security stack that protected everybody's, or, you know, and it's not, I would argue for the most part, it's still not there in the remote place. And then there is realistically a support challenge. You mentioned it, of the poor audio quality, right, for the call center and customer service. Like, those are real world sort of challenges. So, but organizations are trying to, you know, a lot of organizations are trying to, you know, you got to keep up with the Joneses. A lot of organizations are letting people work remote, so some organizations feel they have to as well where it's possible. So it is going to be interesting to see how it evolves in the next sort of 6 months. As the pandemic starts to wind down, at least where I'm at. But there is a benefit of being in the office still from a security perspective, I would argue. But the reality is people are remote. People want to work from wherever. We need to figure that out. Largely we have, but there's still some work to do, I would say. I don't know if that answers the question. Doesn't really. I skirted around it perfectly.
Oh, well, I think, we can always come back to these after the call. And if anyone has any other questions that they, would like answers to, having watched this through the replay, there will be a contact box underneath the video. If you just fill that out, all of those emails will come through to my email, and I'll make sure that one of our panelists receives them and is able to answer your question post call. Thank you to everyone who has joined us today, including our fantastic panel. We would love for you to join us next month for our next webinar on the 12th of August, where we'll be discussing the topic of what happens when a threat actor retires. We'll be sending out information regarding this through our weekly newsletter, but you'll also be able to find our registration link on our social media as well. So hopefully we'll see you then. Thank you and goodbye.